I couldn't believe my ears when Margaret, my mother-in-law, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Well, dear, you're not really family, so there's no need for you to join us on the trip." Her voice was calm, even sweet, as though she were discussing the weather or a new curtain color. My heart pounded. A trip? I knew they were talking about a luxurious family getaway, but I assumed I was included. After all, I'm married to her son, Daniel. I've been part of this family, officially, at least, for 3 years. Still, Margaret's words confirmed what I've felt ever since I first met her. She never truly saw me as one of them. I glanced at Daniel, waiting for him to stand up for me, to show that I wasn't alone. But he seemed as shocked as I was. He opened his mouth as though to protest, but only managed to stutter. Margaret gave him a warning glare, the kind of look that says, "Don't even think about it." I forced a tight smile, fighting the urge to snap back. It was the most humiliating moment I've experienced. She refused to invite me on their fancy vacation, and she did it with a dismissive shrug. But she has no idea who she's dealing with. Later that night, Daniel and I sat in our bedroom, the weight of Margaret's words still heavy. He kept muttering, "I'm sorry," as though it were his fault. I felt a flicker of anger at him for not defending me more strongly, but I also knew Margaret's influence over him was immense. I remembered the first time I met her. She had eyed me up and down and asked about my upbringing in a voice laced with disapproval. Back then, I tried my best to impress her. I helped with the dishes, brought thoughtful gifts, and even feigned interest in the same charities she claimed to support. But no matter what I did, Margaret found a way to make me feel small. A sneer here, a raised eyebrow there. She came from a background of prestige, or at least that's what she wanted everyone to believe. She wore designer clothes, talked about her high society friends, and constantly boasted about upcoming social events. She seemed obsessed with status. When I married Daniel, I promised myself I'd do everything to get along with his family, especially his mother. But with each passing day, it became clearer that no amount of kindness would ever earn her genuine approval. The next morning, I woke up still feeling the sting of Margaret's dismissal. I replayed the scene over and over in my head. Her smug look, my silence, Daniel's weak protest. It was like a broken record I couldn't turn off. Normally, I would just let her insults slide. I'd be polite, keep the peace, and swallow my pride. But something inside me snapped this time. I realized I was tired of the constant jabs, the veiled insults, the way she tried to make me feel less. She always phrased her insults in a sweet, motherly tone that made it hard to call her out. If I dared to complain, I knew she'd act shocked and paint me as the rude one. Over and over, I let it happen, telling myself it was better for family harmony. But not anymore. Excluding me from a family vacation was the final straw. I decided I wouldn't just stand by and let her trample over me again. If she wanted to treat me like I wasn't part of the family, I was going to show her exactly why that was a dangerous game to play. By lunchtime, Margaret had already gathered everyone in the dining room to discuss final details for the upcoming trip. My presence was awkward, as though I were an intruder eavesdropping on secret plans. Her bright smile contrasted with my silent fury. She spoke about the luxury resort in Hawaii as if it were the pinnacle of all vacations. They have private beaches, top-notch spas, and the best restaurants, she gushed. Then she threw me a glance, pretending to be thoughtful. "Oh, I'm sure you'd feel out of place there. It might be too overwhelming. No need to overextend yourself, dear." I nearly bit through my cheek to keep from yelling at her. Instead, I calmly sat and took notes in my head. One day I thought, she'll regret every condescending comment. Daniel caught my eye from across the table. I could see guilt in his face. I wasn't sure whether to blame him or pity him. He was caught between his wife and his mother, a mother who had spent years grooming him to always follow her lead. I wondered how far he'd go to keep peace with her. But I had to handle this on my own terms now. That evening, after everyone else was in bed, I settled onto the sofa with my laptop. My heart thumped as I opened a folder filled with documents, photographs, and emails. For a moment, I hesitated, thinking about the moral side of what I was about to do. Then I reminded myself. Margaret forced my hand. She'd stomped all over my dignity, and it was time I stood up for myself. I had stumbled onto some very interesting information months ago. By sheer coincidence, I found a curious link between the family trust Margaret kept flaunting and certain real estate assets in Hawaii. At first, I dismissed it as none of my business. But the more Margaret belittled me, the more I felt a need to protect myself. And then there was my own personal secret. I owned shares, quite a few actually, in a luxurious resort chain. I'd invested in it before I even met Daniel. It was something I did quietly, never making a fuss about it. Nobody in Daniel's family had any clue. I opened a spreadsheet showing the details of the resort they planned to visit. My name, hidden behind various corporate structures, was all over it. Once upon a time, I thought telling Margaret about my business success would make her proud of me. But then I realized she thrived on believing she was the wealthiest, the most important, and the most connected in the family. If she knew I was financially comfortable, or even surpassing her, she'd never accept it. She'd probably double down on her criticisms or turn it into a competition. So I kept my portfolio a secret, choosing to stay quiet. But now, it felt like destiny that she had chosen this very resort to host her grand family trip, the same resort where I held a controlling interest. She had, in a way, stepped right into my domain. I closed my laptop, mind racing. Should I let her carry on with her plans and then reveal the truth when she arrives? Or should I do it before she even sets foot on the plane? There were many ways to flip the script, and each one promised a level of satisfaction I'd never experienced. But revenge was a tricky beast. I didn't want to be cruel or vindictive. I just wanted to stand up for myself, once and for all, and show her I wasn't to be overlooked. The week before the family trip was a whirlwind of last-minute shopping and excited chatter among the relatives. Whenever they gathered in the living room, I saw them scrolling through the resort's website, admiring photos of the infinity pools and private bungalows. I heard them discuss the best islands to explore, the fancy restaurants they'd dine at, and the spa treatments they planned to book. Each time Margaret spoke, she made sure to remind me that this was a family affair. She'd say things like, "I do hope we can handle the paparazzi," or "It will be such a relief to be among people of our own social level." She never missed a chance to subtly underline that I wasn't on her social level. Daniel was torn. He tried to convince her to change her mind, but Margaret was unyielding. She insisted I wouldn't enjoy it. "It's better she stays home," she said, feigning concern. "She won't understand the lifestyle there." I stayed quiet, though inside, every fiber of me burned with annoyance. If she only knew how well I understood that lifestyle. Soon, she would learn that not all wealth parades around in designer bags and boastful chatter. 2 days before their departure, I decided it was time to set my plan in motion. I made a few discreet phone calls to the resort manager, a close associate who knew me only by my business name and title. We discussed special arrangements, making sure my name stayed confidential. I didn't want any surprises leaked to Margaret before the perfect moment. "Make sure the top suite is reserved in my name," I instructed. "You know the one. Private pool, personal chef, the works. I need everything ready by the time I arrive." "Yes, of course," the manager replied. "Is anyone else traveling with you?" "I'll let you know," I answered calmly. "For now, keep it quiet. I'll handle the rest personally." After hanging up, I felt a rush of adrenaline. Was I really going to fly out there and appear at the resort after Margaret had so rudely excluded me? Absolutely. I wanted her to see me standing tall in a place she thought belonged only to the elite, and on terms she couldn't control. Yet, a sliver of doubt pressed against my excitement. I wondered if I was letting anger blind me, but her insults still rang in my ears, fueling my resolve. Daniel noticed I was busy making calls and prepping. One night, he cornered me in the kitchen while I was quietly packing a small travel bag. "Are you going somewhere?" he asked, confusion written all over his face. I hesitated, then answered, "Yes, I am. To Hawaii. Maybe not with your mother's permission, but I have my own plans." His eyes widened. "You're going on the same trip she excluded you from? How will that work?" I took a deep breath. "Daniel, there are things I haven't shared about my finances. I've kept them private because I didn't want to stir up drama. But Margaret's constant insults, I can't keep letting her push me around." He looked torn. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have understood. I'm your husband." I squeezed his hand gently. "I know, and I'm sorry, but you know how she is. I was afraid it would cause more problems. Listen, this isn't just about revenge. This is about standing up for myself. He looked down, ashamed. I wish I'd stood up for you sooner. I gave him a comforting pat on the shoulder. Don't worry, I'll handle it. But it's time Margaret learns who she's been belittling. When the day of the flight arrived, the family bustled around, suitcases lined up by the door. Margaret was in high spirits, wearing oversized sunglasses and a designer scarf, ready to showcase her vacation glamour. She chattered about first-class seats in the premium lounge at the airport. I kept my own suitcase carefully tucked away. I'd booked a separate flight, quietly, no fanfare. They would depart a few hours earlier, giving me time to finalize my own arrangements. Margaret shot me a satisfied grin as she boarded the car with Daniel, her face broadcasting triumph, as if she had finally put me in my place. Take care, dear, she called, a faux sweetness in her voice. We'll send you pictures. I forced a smile and waved them off, but my heart pounded with anticipation. The moment the car disappeared from view, I turned to lock the door, then quickly called a taxi for myself. My flight was scheduled later that day, first class as well, but under a business alias. No one in Margaret's group would have a clue we'd be staying at the same resort. All the times I'd felt powerless against her arrogant smirks. That was about to change. The flight to Hawaii felt surreal. I looked out the window at the endless ocean below, rehearsing, in my mind, how I'd handle the big reveal. The seat next to me was empty, giving me a moment of privacy to gather my thoughts. A flight attendant offered me a drink. And as I sipped, I tried to picture Margaret's face when she discovered my connection to the resort. Would she be furious? Ashamed? Would she try to deny it? A part of me felt guilty about the possible family rift this might cause, but another part reminded me this was my right. She'd treated me like a second-class citizen for too long. Upon landing, the warm breeze welcomed me, and I stepped onto the island with renewed confidence. I went straight to the VIP lounge, where a resort representative waited to escort me to a private car. I double-checked with the manager. Everything was in place, from the special suite to the unannounced arrival. In a few hours, he said, the rest of the family is scheduled to check in. Would you like me to arrange a separate reception? No, I'll make my entrance on my own, I replied, smiling. My suite was everything I had imagined. Spacious living area, a grand bedroom with a plush bed, and glass doors opening onto a private deck with an infinity pool overlooking the ocean. The gentle sound of waves crashed in the distance, and a soft, tropical scent filled the air. The manager had done an excellent job ensuring my privacy. There were no signs of my name anywhere. Even the staff referred to me by my initials to keep everything discreet. After settling in, I checked the resort's system. As a major shareholder, I had access to certain administrative tools. Margaret and the rest of the family had indeed checked in just an hour ago. They were staying in a cluster of suites on a different floor. Unaware of my presence, I allowed myself a small, satisfied grin. This was the place Margaret had talked about so proudly, acting as if it was the pinnacle of refinement, something she believed I'd never experience. And yet here I was, in the top suite, with all the privileges she could only dream of. I decided to rest for a moment, letting the tension of the long flight fade away. Tomorrow would be an interesting day. Early the next morning, I wandered down to one of the resort's exclusive restaurants, the kind Margaret would likely brag about. The staff greeted me warmly, their eyes hinting they knew my importance to the property. Yet they never betrayed my secret out loud. I found a quiet corner, sipping fresh pineapple juice while scanning the breakfast area. The air was filled with the soft clink of silverware and the low hum of conversation. Sure enough, I spotted Margaret at a large table with her relatives, laughing and chatting like a queen holding court. She looked perfectly content. Apparently, her new environment had boosted her snobbish aura even more. She was wearing a bright floral dress, sporting a wide-brimmed sun hat, and talking in a loud voice about her connections. I took a deep breath, debating whether to greet them. But I decided to hold off. The timing wasn't right. I could wait for a more pivotal moment, one that would truly drive the lesson home. For now, I'd enjoy watching from a distance, soaking in the irony that this whole display was taking place in a resort I had a stake in. Later that afternoon, I saw my chance. Margaret and her entourage were by the poolside, sipping cocktails and chatting up other guests. She was in full bragging mode, casually name-dropping celebrities she claimed to know. I strolled by, pretending I was just another guest. Then she spotted me. I felt her gaze flick across my face, her eyes widening. She nearly choked on her drink. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, trying to keep her composure. She forced a tight, polite smile, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. "Oh, I decided I could use a vacation too," I said casually, looking around at the lush greenery. "This place is truly amazing, isn't it?" She seemed momentarily speechless, scrambling to regain control of the conversation. "Well, it's a family trip," she reminded me, voice tense. "We prefer to keep it intimate." I offered her a warm smile. "Don't worry, I have my own arrangements. I won't impose on your precious family time." Her relatives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, sensing the undercurrent of tension. Margaret tried to laugh it off, but her eyes told me she was anything but amused. The game had begun. That evening, there was a lavish luau on the resort's private beach. Grass skirts, Hawaiian music, and a grand buffet showcased local dishes. The air was festive, the sunset casting a golden glow over the ocean waves. Margaret and her group arrived in style, expecting the best seats, the best service, and plenty of attention. She eyed me from across the gathering, clearly annoyed that I was even present. A few minutes into the event, the resort's general manager, who knew me by my official business standing, approached me privately. "Would you like us to bring out the special presentation now?" he asked quietly, referring to a special performance I had commissioned. I nodded. "Yes, please, it's time." A group of talented dancers took the stage, but instead of just the usual routine, they held up a special banner at the end, welcoming me by name. Not my married name, but the name under which I owned shares in the resort. The manager then publicly thanked me for my generous contributions and support. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret's face paled, her eyes darting back and forth as she tried to process what was happening. The family members all looked at me in shock. The moment the announcer mentioned my role in the resort, whispers spread like wildfire. I could see heads turning, guests murmuring, staff bowing respectfully in my direction. My heart pounded. I felt both exhilarated and nervous. This was the big reveal I had been planning. Margaret stood rooted in place, eyes wide with disbelief. It was as if she couldn't comprehend that the same daughter-in-law she had dismissed could wield such power here. Her relatives stared at me, confused and speechless. Daniel, who had been sitting next to his mother, slowly rose and walked toward me. "So this is what you meant," he whispered, a mix of awe and concern in his voice. "You really? You own this place?" "Not entirely," I said gently, "but I'm a major shareholder. I've kept it private for a reason." The manager then turned to me and asked if I'd like to say a few words. I hesitated. Public speaking wasn't my forte, but I walked up, feeling Margaret's burning gaze. I thanked the staff for their hard work and expressed my gratitude for the opportunity to be part of such a wonderful establishment. When I finished, the applause felt like a victory I'd waited too long for. After the luau ended, Margaret cornered me near a cluster of palm trees. The festive music was still in the air, but her face was anything but festive. She looked furious and, for the first time, maybe even frightened. "You've been hiding this all along?" she hissed, her tone accusing. I calmly folded my arms. "I never hid anything. I chose not to flaunt it. Unlike you, I don't believe wealth should be used to belittle others," she sputtered, trying to find words. "You made a fool out of me. All this time, I've been talking about my connections, my social standing, and you were the real power player?" I took a deep breath. "Margaret, you've never stopped reminding me that I'm not family enough. You made me feel like an outsider. I simply showed you that your assumptions about me were wrong." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "The family will think I lied to them. Everyone will know I exaggerated your status," I offered softly. "Perhaps you should have treated me with respect instead of constantly trying to embarrass me." Her eyes flickered with rage, but beneath it, I saw something else: fear. She realized her pretense was unraveling fast. The next morning, rumors about my surprise reveal had spread among the guests. People whispered about the rich wife who had been excluded from her own in-laws' vacation. I noticed Margaret walked around with her head lowered, avoiding eye contact. She couldn't boast now without risking questions about why she didn't know her own daughter-in-law's status. Daniel approached me cautiously. "Mom's in a panic," he said, his voice trembling. "She's afraid the rest of the family will turn on her for lying about her connections and finances." "Lying?" I asked, feigning ignorance. He sighed, pressing a hand to his forehead. "She's always made her life sound bigger than it is. She inflated her bank statements, claimed acquaintances with famous people, and bragged about owning homes she never actually owned. She was terrified anyone might discover the truth." I felt a strange mix of pity and annoyance. That explained her obsession with status. She was living in constant fear of being exposed. Now, with my surprise reveal, her carefully crafted image was crumbling. Daniel looked at me with pleading eyes. "Please, can we keep the family drama to a minimum? I know she deserves a lesson, but I don't want a full-blown scandal." Part of me sympathized with Daniel's request. I didn't want to cause a family crisis, at least not a bigger one than Margaret had already set off. But I also knew she needed to learn that actions have consequences. If she insisted on treating me as an outsider, she couldn't expect me to protect her secrets. Still, I agreed to handle things with care. "I'll keep it civil," I said. "But no more bullying, Daniel. I mean it." He nodded, relief washing over him. He was stuck in a tough spot, a devoted son to a controlling mother, and a husband who wanted to make things right for his wife. I couldn't fault him for trying to keep the peace. Later that day, I got a private message from the resort manager. Margaret had tried to upgrade her suite, likely in a desperate attempt to maintain her image. But the manager explained that all premium upgrades required my approval. "What would you like me to do?" he asked. I paused for a moment, tapping my phone thoughtfully. Then I responded, "Approve it. Let her have the nicer suite. But make sure the bill gets settled properly." There was no need to stoop to her level of pettiness. As the family vacation continued, I noticed a shift in how Margaret's relatives interacted with me. Some approached me cautiously, apologizing for any discomfort and admitting they had been misled by Margaret's stories. Others seemed eager to befriend me, as though my newfound status suddenly made me more worthwhile in their eyes. The irony wasn't lost on me. These were the same people who once ignored me at family gatherings or took cues from Margaret's icy behavior. Now, they smiled and tried to invite me to activities. Part of me wanted to brush them off, but Daniel's words about keeping the peace echoed in my mind. So I responded politely, hoping to set a better tone going forward. Meanwhile, Margaret tried to maintain a semblance of dignity. She avoided public scenes but glared at me when she thought no one else was watching. I knew she blamed me for exposing her. In her mind, I had turned her perfect vacation into a minefield. But I had no regrets. I didn't create her lies or her arrogance. I simply revealed a truth that she couldn't handle. Now it was up to her to either reconcile with it or continue living in denial. Around midweek, the resort hosted a grand social event by the ocean. Guests could mingle, sip cocktails, and watch a breathtaking fire dance under the stars. Typically, such an event was Margaret's playground, a chance to network and show off. By the time I arrived, the party was in full swing. Torchlit paths led to elegantly decorated tables. The sound of ocean waves provided a soothing backdrop. I saw Margaret standing stiffly, trying to chat with a wealthy couple. But every so often she glanced around nervously, as if worried I might show up and steal her thunder. I decided to approach her anyway. Enough tiptoeing. She saw me coming and straightened her posture, forcing a tight smile. "Good evening," she said, voice clipped. The couple next to her offered polite nods. I introduced myself, using the name I'd always gone by, without mentioning anything about my shares in the resort. If Margaret wanted to keep up her act, I'd let her, for now. But then, to her horror, the couple recognized my name from the resort's announcements earlier in the week. They launched into praise about my contributions and vision for the property. Margaret's face was a picture of dread. She couldn't escape this reality now. The couple's compliments about my role in the resort kept coming. They even asked me about future plans for expansion, praising the improvements I'd funded. Margaret stood there, her smile frozen. I almost felt sorry for her, stranded in the conversation as they praised a person she'd openly snubbed. To her credit, she tried to salvage her dignity. I'm sure my daughter-in-law means well, she said, her tone forced. We're all about family success. Her words rang hollow, considering how she'd excluded me from her family trip. The couple politely excused themselves after a while, and Margaret turned to me with cold eyes. This is humiliating, she whispered. Do you enjoy watching me squirm? Because that's what this is, torture. I took a deep breath, keeping my composure. No, Margaret, I don't enjoy this. But I'm not going to hide who I am anymore, just to spare your pride. She said nothing, her gaze wandering to Daniel, who was talking with some relatives across the way. The bitterness in her voice when she finally spoke was palpable. I suppose you've won, she said flatly. Everyone is eating out of your hand now. I simply gave her a measured look. It's not about winning, it's about respect. As the event wound down, I retreated to a quieter corner of the beach. The moon was high, casting silver reflections on the water. I was thinking about how different this trip had turned out compared to Margaret's original plan. Instead of a cozy family vacation that excluded me, it had become a battleground of social status and hidden truths. Daniel found me, kicking off his shoes to walk on the sand. Are you okay? He asked, concern etched on his face. I nodded. I'm fine, just thinking. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I never wanted it to turn into this spectacle, but I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. I took his hand. You're here now. That's what matters. We stood there for a while, watching the waves roll in. I knew Margaret was likely fuming somewhere, but for once, I felt at peace. I had nothing to prove anymore. Daniel squeezed my hand gently. Maybe when we get back, we can start fresh. No more secrets. No more letting her dictate everything. I nodded. I'd like that, but she'll have to meet us halfway. On the final day of the trip, the resort arranged a closing ceremony, complete with live music and a themed dinner. Everyone gathered in the grand hall, and I noticed a change in the atmosphere. Some of Margaret's relatives who had once shunned me now waved me over to their table. They seemed eager to have me nearby. Margaret arrived late, wearing a subdued outfit and looking more tired than I'd ever seen her. She quietly took a seat at the far end of the room. The once radiant smile that boasted of social supremacy was gone. As the night progressed, a small group of local performers came out, singing and dancing. Their final act was a heartfelt tune about family unity and the spirit of aloha. The lyrics struck a chord with me. Midway through the performance, I noticed Margaret getting up and heading outside. I followed her. She stood alone under a palm tree, arms crossed. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I'm leaving early tomorrow, she said softly. I can't stay here. It's too embarrassing. I understood. She had built her self-image on a shaky foundation, and now it was collapsing in front of everyone. I stepped closer, the tropical breeze carrying the distant sounds of music. Margaret, I began, my voice calm. This trip didn't have to turn out this way. I never wanted a war. I only wanted to be treated with respect. She looked at the ground. You've made your point. She hesitated before continuing, her voice shaky. I'm not as well off as I claim. I've always worried people would see through me. When Daniel married you, I felt threatened. You seemed so competent, so independent. I thought if people found out you were more successful, they'd realize I was nothing. A wave of pity washed over me. But you're not nothing. You're Daniel's mother. You didn't need to tear me down. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I know, and now everyone knows I exaggerated. They see how I treated you. I've lost their respect. I took a deep breath. Maybe this is a chance to rebuild, honestly. Be yourself. She looked unsure, but she nodded. I'm sorry, she whispered. I accepted her apology with a slow nod. It wouldn't erase the past, but it was a start. As the music played on, I realized the lesson was learned. True family isn't about who's rich or who fits a certain mold. It's about respect, honesty, and treating each other with genuine warmth. And sometimes the harshest truths lead to the greatest changes.